President Obama will give his first post-election speech on America's looming fiscal crisis. That's page 1 of today's Wall Street Journal. Good morning. I'm Rolf Winkler. Welcome to the News Hub. What will the president say? Is there an opportunity to strike a grand bargain on debt? Laura Meckler joins us from Washington. Laura, good morning.
Good morning.
So let's set the stage here, of course. Democrats added a little bit to their majority in the House. Of course, they kept the White House. Republicans still do have the House of Representatives. So there's a need to compromise here. And my question leading off is, will Republicans agree to any sort of tax increases? And will Democrats agree to any kind of entitlement cuts?
I think most people think that that's where the deal has to be, with both of those elements in it. Speaker Boehner has said over the last couple of days that House Republicans will agree to more revenue, more tax revenue. He doesn't want to see tax rates per se go up. So that's a little bit of requires some interpretation. What does he mean? And Democrats have been trying to figure out exactly what does he mean by that. So there are, of course, other ways to bring in tax revenue. You can close deductions and that sort of thing, and that brings in more revenue without touching tax rates. But we don't really know exactly what his bottom line is. But what we do know is that he has opened the door to more revenue publicly on taxes. And most Democrats view that as an encouraging sign. As for the White House, they know that they're going to have to give some on entitlements in order to get what they want on taxes. There's just no question about that. Of course, doing it is, saying it is easier than doing it. President Obama just finished a campaign which was about protecting Medicare from his point of view. So he's going to have to find a way to prepare his party and the country for some concessions on that side as well.
Let's come back to that in a second. But speaking of Speaker Boehner, you have an interesting little tidbit in your story today. On a conference call with Republicans, he said not to draw lines in the sand, quote, "We don't want to box ourselves in and we don't want to box the White House out," end quote. So you're talking about parsing statements from Mr. Boehner. What are we to read into that?
Right. And that story is actually by colleagues of mine, but just to be credit where credit is due. But what he meant when he said that was, let's keep the door open. And I think that is a very encouraging sign for those people who would like to see a deal done. What he's basically saying is, let's not go out there and say, no, no, no. Let's open the door and see what is possible. And I think that President Obama was sending a similar message the night of his victory when he was saying the American people expect us to work together and come together as Americans. So I think that both sides have been making conciliatory gestures to talk about how they can come together. We're going to hear today from President Obama at the White House, which, as you said, will be his first extensive comments on the fiscal cliff and what he thinks the approach needs to be. So we'll see how he'll have an opportunity to respond to Speaker Boehner. But I think that what we've heard from the speaker has been largely encouraging if you're looking for some sort of a compromise.
Okay, now let's get down to get a little more detailed here in what could happen. There's obviously short-term urgency to deal with the fiscal cliff, the tax increases and spending cuts that go into effect January 1st. But, it feels like every year we're pushing back the alternative minimum tax, or I should say pushing back payments to doctors, Medicare payment cuts to doctors, doing an alternative minimum tax patch. So there's always short-term urgency to fix those problems, but you never get the sort of long-term grand bargain on debt. Will we get that kind of grand bargain before the new year, or is it going to be another short-term fix, hoping for a bigger solution later?
Right. Well, that's a really good question. And there are, in fact, those issues are on the table this year as they are every year. So that's something that they're going to have to deal with as well. But yes, in terms of a long-term fix, both sides say they want that. President Obama has certainly said that he wants that. And I think that the idea that you're going to get a big, $4 trillion deal before December is probably not realistic. What most people think is more likely is you get something short-term that kind of deals with the immediate crisis with some sort of a promise or enforcing mechanism, which, we know those things don't always work. That's where we got the looming spending cuts known as the sequester was meant to be a forcing mechanism, a couple of years ago. But in any case, that's what we'll probably see is some sort of a kicking it to next year to do, say, a broad tax reform. That's how most people think you end up with increased taxes, is through a tax reform process, as opposed to through a, just a straight up, write a few lines on a piece of paper, and raise taxes. It's more likely to be through a tax reform situation, which is something that Republicans are more comfortable with. Democrats would be fine with just saying, let's extend the Bush era tax rate to lower rates for everybody under $250,000, and income over 250 would be taxed at the higher rate. That would be easy. But Republicans are not going to want to do that. So it's more likely to be done through tax reform. And so all of that are the elements of the grand bargain you're talking about. And chances are we're going to need months to do that, not weeks.
Okay. Laura Meckler in Washington, thanks so much.